Greetings to you all fellow travelers. This is Krotnip, welcoming you all back to the logbook of a simple lindworm traveler. In today's tortured production of an episode, we are going to be talking about the northern tribes Revenants. So who is the Revenant? As those familiar with the source book already know, the orcs of Lindworm actually keep growing bigger and stronger until the day they die. There is however a point in each orc's life at which their combination of strength, dexterity and skills is at its peak, and these warriors are called prime warriors, contenders or wrathmanes depending on their social standing. After this point, the orcs do continue to become bigger and stronger, even still, yes, but this bulk comes at the cost of their dexterity, which means that while the older orcs are really strong, they aren't as nimble and in some regards even as dangerous as their younger compatriots. This doesn't usually tend to be a problem for the orcs, however. Due to the demanding lifestyles that they lead, they hunt very dangerous game for their sustenance, and each orc is expected to contribute to fighting the enemies of the tribe. Few orcs actually ever reach the ripe age of 50, but those few that do are faced with a problem in their own minds. You see, the orcs believe that they are destined to return to the world spirit after they die, so that they can re-enter the cycle of life, being born back into the natural world either as a living being or maybe as a natural phenomenon such as a rock formation. But the older orcs, who by their very nature are usually the last ones standing from a cadre of similarly aged orcs, seem to have a tendency to become worried about being left behind. There is a fear in them that the circle of life has abandoned them and they are destined to live a life of deteriorating mental and physical existence, becoming a mass of muscle and ferocity, yes, but at the same time being at the risk of losing what it means to be an orc in the first place. When the elderly orc can no longer stand the current state of things, they will don the mantle of a revenant. The rest of the tribe will hold a funeral for this still living orc, and they will be painted with war paints, usually red, because that seems to be the color of death for the orcish culture. Henceforth, the rest of the tribe will only speak of the Revenant as if they had already passed from this world, and they avoid making direct contact with the massive warrior. When the battle is joined then, the Revenant charges the enemy battle lines looking for the biggest and most dangerous enemies to face off against, hoping that among them he will find those that are capable of fulfilling the Revenant's destiny by allowing him to die and rejoin the circle of life. So the Revenant is on a one-way trip to the world spirit when they enter the field of battle. With the backstory covered, next let's advance to the basic stats on the Revenant. This card picture is taken from the Discord server where it was originally revealed to us. As you can see, the Revenant is quite an expensive piece to include in your company. 40 points is getting up there with a unit of orc hunters and a attached officer type character, so we do need to get a lot of mileage out of our Revenant in order to make this points cost be worthwhile. This is going to be my main knock on the Revenant. He's a great model, but he is an expensive model nonetheless. At 2-3 movement, the Revenant is in practice pretty much as swift as any of the orcs, so not all that swift in other words, but he does have a slightly higher charge distance than your average Northern Tribes unit at 11 strides, and this should facilitate him engaging the enemy and even potentially out-threatening certain units altogether. There has to be a reason our Revenant has reached such a formidable an age, and one of those, in gameplay terms, is related to his wound attribute. At 5 wounds and some pretty excellent defensive kit, especially for a Northern Tribes model, the Revenant is quite hard to bring down. The Revenant is packing great moral value of 3, meaning that he can push for extra performance and or be activated several times each round if and when that's a good idea. At a first glance, his willpower of a double yellow does seem suspiciously low, however, but this is simply due to the fact that the Revenant is actually an elite model, and for a elite model, yellow willpower dice are as good as orange dice are for lesser troops. This actually translates into a situation where the Revenant is packing the joint highest willpower, base willpower that is in the Northern Tribes faction, as well as the joint highest moral stat, so nothing but greatness here all around. The Revenant is such a rare figure among the Orcish ranks that there is only one available, and that makes a lot of sense, considering what we have already discussed about when it comes to this model's backstory. The Revenant is an Orc character, and since he can't join any units, this Orc tag is really only going to come up with few of the supportive abilities that other Orcish models have access to. So being an Orc is usually, I would argue, a bit better than being a Varrank, since there are numerically more Orc related special abilities and more powerful ones than when it comes to being a Varrank. The fact that the Revenant is a support model does not actually mean all that much. As already stated, he cannot join units, so the support status only matters in that he cannot be the leader of your company, and that's really it. When it comes to the keywords department, the most important one is elite. Elite means that the Revenant is extremely consistent with his willpower rolls. He's able to leverage his defensive dice to even greater an extent, and obviously it does help with attacking also, but the Revenant is naturally packing such powerful solid success switch that the actual additional damage isn't all that much there, but more on that later. Interestingly enough, the Revenant is also immovable, which means that enemies cannot leverage blaze, displace effects and such abilities on him. Since the Revenant isn't a piece to hold ground with under most circumstances, the value of immovable is a bit debatable. But every now and then there is going to be a situation where your opponent would want to push or attract or place the Revenant for whatever reason, and you simply get to say no to all of that. When it comes to the psychological side of the Revenant's keywords, he's packing Fearless and Intimidating 1. Fearless means that opponents can't play tricks on the old Orc by frightening him, nor can they leverage intimidating keyword against him so as to inflict stress upon the Revenant. This also has the added beneficial effect of stopping some ability chains that are contingent on your model suffering from the frightened state. Intimidating 1 is nice, it can potentially result in extra stress on enemy units, but it's to be expected that even the most low willpower of enemy units usually pass this test, so don't count on intimidating 1 inflicting all that much stress, that is moral damage, on the enemy, but rather I would look at it as a beneficial bonus that can sometimes kick in even if you don't expect it to. Finally, when it comes to the top part of the Revenant's card, our old orc is packing conquest value of 1. That's not amazing. There are only a few ways of actually improving Revenant's conquest. The Contender's Orc Commander comes to mind as of right now at least, but the Revenant can wrestle objectives from Conquest 0 enemy troops, and he can also hold objectives against Conquest 1 troops, so there is something there, even if it's not going to be his primary function. Let's take a short detour to talk about a couple of the Revenant's passive skills before moving on to the attack breakdown, since these are rather important things to take note of when it comes to our Revenant inflicting damage. The first of these offensively minded passive skills that the Revenant has access to is called Fulfill Their Destiny. It's a passive skill that allows the Revenant to add an automatic success to both their attack and defense rolls for each wound that they currently have on their profile card. This essentially means that the Revenant becomes more dangerous and more fierce the more they take damage during the time of the battle. And since there is no luck involved in leveraging this ability, it's simply contingent on how much damage the Revenant has already taken. This is pretty surefire thing to go off unless your Revenant gets taken out in one fell swoop, which shouldn't happen all that often, to be entirely honest. This ability also works as something of a deterrent for your opponent. They probably don't want to cause cheap damage against the Revenant if they aren't going to be able to bring him down in quick succession, since the Revenant will become ever more dangerous and they will be inflicting ever more damage on the enemy after they have taken some in return. So in a optimal situation, the Northern Tribes player can enforce damned if you do, damned if you don't type situations on their enemy by pushing the Revenant forward and forcing the enemy to either try and bypass this monstrous orc or engage it and suffer the extra damage as the wounded Revenant goes berserk on them. The second passive offensively minded ability or skill of the Revenant is called Monster Slayer. This means that when the Revenant is making an attack roll against a large unit or a cavalry unit, they get to add a red dice and a hollow success to their roll. And as we are about to see, the hollow success is the best kind of symbol for Revenant in many cases. In practice, Monster Slayer adds average 3 and maximum 4 effective damage against an enemy large or cavalry unit, and as you're about to see from the offensive breakdown, this, when combined with the naturally high attack characteristic of the Revenant, his offensive push modifier and Fulfill Their Destiny ability, can quite quickly lead into extremely silly offensive numbers that should be more than enough to take out pretty much anything large or cavalry that the enemy has decided to throw into the fray. This also means that the Revenant can be, at least in theory, leveraged as a counter-offensive element that holds the line waiting for the big stuff from the opponent to come in. And once the enemy does that, then you can let Revenant out of its chain to counter-attack enemy cavalry units and large units and hopefully make short work of them. This is also where I think that the Revenant's value proposition really goes through the roof, since even though you are paying for a 40-point model to get access to this combat power, the large units and cavalry units of the enemy are usually high value targets, both for their points cost and for their tactical performance, so this is more or less what the Revenant is meant to do. Oh boy, that's quite a busy attack breakdown right there. Let's see if we can analyze this with any sense of clarity. Let's actually start from the very end of this slide. As you can see, the Revenant has access to a single special switch ability that causes the vulnerable state upon the enemy targeted by his attack. Since the Revenant is an elite model, this means that both solid and hollow special symbols can be used to leverage the switch ability. So under the normal circumstances of simply rolling Revenant's attack dice against a non-large and non-cavalry enemy unit, there should be about 95% a chance of this switch going off, and if the Revenant pushes for extra performance, the resulting vulnerable state is automatic. So you should be going into your attack rolls more or less thinking that okay, the Revenant is going to inflict the vulnerable state upon the enemy in addition to any and all damage that he does. In addition to this, the Revenant has access to another switch, and this one is pretty amazing. When the Revenant rolls any hollow successes, they effectively explode into 2 points of effective damage, thanks to the fact that the Revenant can use a switch that causes the hollow success to remove a block from the enemy's roll, as well as to add a success to the Revenants, which essentially means that the Revenant will never be using elite to turn those hollow successes into solid ones, since the hollow success switch is always as good, if not better, than the solid success would be. Obviously, with the caveat that if there is an enemy ability that stops you from using switches, then obviously you go for the elite. What's great about the switch is the fact that, as already stated earlier, the Monster Slayer special rule, when it kicks in, adds not only a red dice to your roll, but also a hollow success symbol, which gives you access to this excellent 2 points of effective damage. The rest of the damage that the Revenant is going to be inflicting is based on his successes, both natural, push related, and those given to him by his additional passive abilities. All in all, this means that the Revenant, when simply attacking unwounded a non-monster slayer target and not pushing, is on average dealing a moderate 4 points of damage with the ceiling of 7. But if the Revenant chooses to push for extra performance, then the average damage goes up by a point, and the potential damage ceiling goes up by 2. If the Revenant is engaging a large or cavalry unit, then they will be getting additional 2 points of effective damage due to the hollow success symbol that they gain, as well as yet another red dice's worth of damage added in there, and then you get to add the fulfill their destiny automatic successes for the wounds that the Revenant has already suffered. So the absolute maximum performance from the Revenant is going to be average 11 effective damage without pushing for extra, and 14 for the absolute ceiling. And if and when pushing for that extra performance, the Revenant will be on average dealing massive 13 points of damage with a ceiling of 17. And this is getting into cartoonishly silly totals right there. Yes, there aren't going to be too many situations where you get to leverage full power, fulfill their destiny, monster slayer, and push for extra performance. But then again, if you look at all the numbers available there, you usually don't need to. The amount of damage that the Revenant can put out there, even while relying only one or two of those additional ways of creating that damage, is truly terrifying. So you will be looking to get the Revenant into melee and working as soon as possible. But at the same time, you do need to remember that he's a high priority target for your opponent to either wipe out or crowd control, so don't make it too easy on them. Force the enemy to first send their troops in and then counter with the Revenant, so that you get the most out of this amazing, cartoonishly powerful offensive role. Okay, let's talk about the Revenant's defensive capabilities next. Our first stop is going to be his last passive skill, Orc Scars. Orc Scars is exactly the same passive skill that can already be found on the battle card, and it's meant to represent the orcs' skins becoming more like natural armor due to the battle wounds that they have survived so far. Orc Scars allows the Revenant to ignore a single wound they would be receiving when they are attacking or the target of an attack. So it's essentially an automatic block for your attack rolls and for your defense rolls that cannot be mitigated by the use of abilities like switches that deny blocks. So this makes the Revenant even more difficult to bring down, and it will reduce the value of enemy counter attacks against him when it comes to, for example, defensive push modifiers that other Northern Tribes units have access to. Orc Scars also plays very well together with Fulfill Their Destiny, since enemies looking to take out the Revenant have to contend with the fact that not only is the Revenant a piece with 5 wounds and quite decent a defense roll for a Northern Tribes model, but each time the enemy attacks they also have to overcome the Orc Scars ability, which means that they will usually be chipping in a wound or at most a few wounds, and thus they are simply making the Revenant more angry and more dangerous thanks to Fulfill Their Destiny, and taking out the Revenant in one go should be pretty tall a ask for most things out there. And this leads us to the Revenant's defensive breakdown. While the dice pool available to the Revenant isn't all that great, blue, black, and an automatic block, the elite keyword actually means that he'll be rolling on average 2 blocks per roll when we take into account the automatic block symbol, and he has the potential for 3. Then we do need to remember that there's also the Orc Scars that we just talked about, so that's effectively average 3, maximum 4 blocks. And if the Revenant pushes for extra performance on the defensive, not only does he gain 2 to 3 successes worth of counter-attacking damage, remember the elite here, since there is no hollow success switch to leverage, but also the defensive push modifier adds an automatic block to the Revenant's roll. So a Revenant pushing for extra defensive performance will be nullifying on average 4 points of damage and on maximum 5 points of damage when an enemy is attacking him, so he should be able to go toe to toe with anything that your opponent will throw at him, and he should be surviving the counter attack or the first strike from the enemy, and then you are free to let rip with your fulfill their destiny empowered counter attack. Just be careful when stressing for the extra performance and activating the Revenant several times in a row, because morale is going to be the hard cap that will at some point stop the Revenant from attacking, as long as you are not able to rest or reduce that stress by other means, such as, for example, the Evoker's Delegate of the Ancestors ability. And that all leads us nicely to the end analysis. The Revenant very much seems like an expensive and tough a damage dealer whose specialty lies in taking down enemy cavalry units and those larger creatures and machines with the large keyword. The main thing holding our venerable Orc warrior back is going to be his lowish speed. At 2-3 movement, the Revenant is quite activation intensive to maneuver into position, and even though his charge distance of 11 strides is quite decent when it comes to infantry units, it is going to leave him lacking when it comes to out-threatening those cavalry and large based models. So you, as the Northern Tribes player, will be called upon to engineer a situation where you can lure in the enemy's high value units and then counter them with your Revenant's attack. Then again, the Revenant is such a powerful a piece that there are few weaknesses baked into his profile and his abilities beyond his slow speed and his high cost, since at morale 3 and essentially double orange willpower, he is not particularly susceptible to psychological effects, especially since he also packs the fearless keyword. He is not particularly susceptible to automatic wound causing effects thanks to his Orc Scars ability, and he's also packing 5 wounds and rolling quite excellent a defensive role for a Northern Tribes unit. So I don't see many easy and cost-effective ways for your opponent to get rid of the Revenant, as long as you can position him right so that the opponent cannot avoid him. The Revenant should be raking in some excellent damage for your cause. At the best of times, the Revenant should be able to enforce damned if you do, damned if you don't types of situations on the enemy, since attacking the creature will only make it more terrifyingly powerful when the Revenant gets to attack, while not attacking the Revenant risks this venerable Orc chain activating and going primeval on the enemy. While the Revenant can accept some decent support from other Northern Tribes units, he's also, to my liking, quite a excellent plug and play solution that you don't need to build around or build with all that much. If you have 40 points to spend, you can simply throw in the Revenant and consider your damage dealing potential or your damage dealing role to be more or less fulfilled, as long as you don't mind having to be a bit of a slow goer when it comes to getting there. Okay, that was my thoughts on the Revenant. Thank you for sticking with me, even though this episode has been long in the making. Safe travels, everyone. Hope to see you again soon.